I'm delighted to now introduce Linsey, who's a professor in the Modern and Classical Languages and Cultures Department, an associate professor, or assistant professor who just came to press. Welcome.
Thank you, Nikki. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. I hope you feel well rested and ready for a second day of dynamic and rich intellectual exchange around Foucault and his legacies. As Nikki mentioned, my name is Linsey and I will be in charge of moderating what promises to be what I would call the provocative panel, if I may say so. Which is titled Future Possibilities. Thank you, Nikki, for including me in this wonderful exchange, and it's a great pleasure to be here. All right, without further ado, it is my utmost pleasure to introduce our first panelist, who is Dr. Biko Mandela-Gray. Dr. Biko Mandela-Gray is an associate professor of religion at Syracuse University. He writes and teaches about the intersection of Black life, ethics, and philosophy of religion. He is the author, co-author, or co-editor of 3 books: Black Lives Matter, Duke 2022, Phenomenology of Black Spirit, co-authored with Ryan Johnson, Edinburgh 2022, and The Religion of White Rage, co-edited with Laurie Martin and Stephen Finley, Edinburgh 2020. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. So a couple of thank yous, and then I guess, as is often the case, one apology. So the first thing I just want to say is thank you to all of the folks, particularly the folks who did labor to make this happen, the folks who are not in the room making this possible, the janitors, right? The folks who cleaned this space. I want to acknowledge those folks and say thank you to them. The second person, or the second group of folks I would thank are the graduate students. I want you all to give it up for them. Actually, they have done incredible work. I have not wanted for anything, which is sort of interesting for me. I'm usually like, oh, can I get you something? They're like, no, can I get you something? So I'm very grateful. I know, they literally took my orange peels. So I am definitely grateful for them. I'm grateful for everyone who made this possible. And third, and I'm going to embarrass her on this, I want to say thank you to my teacher, Nikki Kasumi Clements. She is the person who trained me in philosophy of religion, and after that introduced me to Foucault. So we're going to go ahead and get right in this. The title of my paper changed because I have the privilege and the luxury of hearing everyone else talk, so I get to make edits along the way. The title of my paper is Sojourner's Truth: The Scandalous Ethics of Enfleshed Parrhesia. On the first page of October 5th, and I should say this as sort of a lead up very briefly, I come to Foucault not as a Foucault scholar, and I don't say that as an apology, but I say that as I'm interested in ethics. My first book was trying to understand anti-Blackness as a mode of normative subject formation, which is to say anti-Blackness as itself in ethics. But now I'm asking, what does it look like for Black ethics to me to show itself? And this is where my engagement with Foucault comes in. So you won't hear too much archival work, and this comes to the apology too. I know English. I don't know French that well, so I'm using translations here. Don't judge me unless it's absolutely important to judge me. On the first page of October 15th, 1858, the October 15th, 1858 edition of the abolitionist newspaper, the Boston Liberator, we encounter a scandalous story. If you read the story's headline, though, you'd be deceived. Pro-slavery in Indiana doesn't quite shock the conscience, and neither do the first lines, quote, Sojourner Truth, an elderly colored woman, well known throughout the eastern states, is now holding a series of anti-slavery meetings in northern Indiana. Sojourner comes well recommended and was gladly received by the friends of the slave in this locality, unquote. If you read on, though, things take a turn. The abolitionists were happy to hear from Sojourner, the formerly enslaved Black woman whose life story was just as extraordinary as her oratorical abilities. Unlike other stories of escape in slave narratives where subterfuge, secrecy, and dissimulation were tools of the trade for the slave, Sojourner just walked off. And I do mean walked. After being duped by her master for working another year and then hearing from her God, she woke up early in the morning, packed her youngest child on her back, and simply walked. And not far either. Her master knew where she was. He would find her within days, and they would often see one another, but she would never work for him again, ever. Sojourner's story was incredible. She was incredible. Anyway, just wanted to give that context, back to the scandalous events of October 1858. While her abolitionist friends in Indiana were excited to see her, pro-slavery apologists were less than enthused. As the news of her arrival spread, these pro-slavery advocates came up with an idea: discredit this woman. How? By questioning her gender. Before she even arrived in Indiana, rumors started to circulate. Sojourner Truth might be a man in woman's clothing. She might be a pervert. You all should be familiar with that term. We're not sure she is who she says she is. And by the time Sojourner arrived in Silver Lake, Indiana on October 1st, the rumors had set in. The conditions were ripe for something scandalous to happen. The pro-slavery Democrats were civil, though. They were civil, as Southern people often want to be. And I'm Southern, but anyway, as she spoke, they didn't disrupt her, or at least they didn't disrupt her enough so that she couldn't finish. But we should never mistake civility for progress, because as soon as Sojourner finished, things turned. A doctor named T.W. Strain, the alleged mouthpiece of the slave democracy, was more than happy to say out loud what until then had only existed in rumor. Quote, Dr. T.W. Strain stated that a doubt existed in the minds of many persons present respecting the sex of the speaker, and that it was his impression that a majority of them believed the speaker to be a man. The doctor also affirmed, which was not believed by the friends of the slave, that it was for the speaker's special benefit that he now demanded that Sojourner submit her breast, expose herself to some of the ladies present, that the doubt might be removed by their testimony. Under the guise of civility, it was for the speaker's special benefit. Strain, as apt a name as you might get, demanded that Sojourner Truth prove the truth of her sex. But again, he was civil or civilized. It would be imprudent for him to peer upon her nude Black body, so he delegated the process of verification, or as I will say for reasons that will become clear later, veridiction. He delegated this process of veridiction to the women in the crowd. Sojourner's friends were pissed. The outrage was rising. Blood was about to boil. This might go to blows, but as I told you, Sojourner was incredible. She kept her head, and in doing so, she kept the crowd from escalating to violence. Quote, confusion and uproar ensued, which was soon suppressed by Sojourner, who, immediately rising, asked them why they suspected her to be a man. The democracy answered, your voice is not the voice of a woman. It is the voice of a man, and we believe you are a man. Dr. Strain called for a vote, and a boisterous aye was the result. A negative vote was not called for. It is here, in the wake of this farcical display of democracy, a negative vote was not called for, that the scandal occurs. I don't need to set it up. William Hayward, the author of this piece, describes things quite clearly. Sojourner told these men that her breast had suckled many a white babe, to the exclusion of her own offspring. That some of those white babies, had grown to man's estate. And that although they had suckled her colored breasts, they were, in her estimation, far more manly than her persecutors appeared to be. And here's the piece. And she quietly asked them, as she disrobed her bosom, if her detractors wished to suck. In vindication of her truthfulness, she told them that she would show her breast to the whole congregation, that it was not to her shame that she uncovered her breast before them, but to theirs, unquote. Standing before the violent mass of misogynoirist Democrats, on Sojourner Truth exposed her breast as confirmation of the truth of her gender. She was indeed a woman, and the crowd was shocked. On October 1st, 1858, in Silver Lake, Indiana, a tall, charismatic, bold, illiterate, honest, and frank Black woman named Sojourner Truth exposed herself in front of a group of white people, which is to say she enacted parrhesia in and through and as her flesh. In this regard, and this is the piece you might want to tune into if you've been bored so far, though I doubt it, we might call Sojourner's actions what I call parrhesia in the flesh, or as a shorthand, enfleshed parisia. As we all know, the term parisia was central to the later Foucault's understanding of ethics. However, and look, I'm Nikki's student, so just write it out. However, as Nikki Kasumi Clements points out, parisia wouldn't hold a stable meaning over the course of Foucault's last years. Clements shows us that at least from as early as 1980, Foucault was relating parisia, quote, to the direction of conscience where the master trains the disciple. Was relating parisia to, quote, to the direction of conscience where the master trains the disciple. Such truth-telling requires that the disciple truthfully open their heart to their director, unquote. So in 1980, parisia is defining this sort of like relationship between a disciple and their master, right? This is what we see in Foucault. Eventually, by the time we get to the 82, 83, 84 lectures, parisia is expanded out to deal with something like public speaking truth to power. This is what Nikki is talking about. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip past all of the textual stuff that I have here, but that's the piece that we need to see, that parisia does not actually maintain a stable meaning over time, right? And so by the time he gets to these lectures in 83, 84, he will be mentioning multiple examples of parisia, and Socrates' apology is a famous one. But he seems partial to the cynics. That's what it seems to me. Again, look, I'm reading this, but he seems partial to the cynics. While people like Socrates enact parisia in particular situations that are, quote, harmonious with their lives, the cynics link parisia to one's life, quote, in a much tighter, more precise way, unquote. In other words, cynic parisia isn't expressed simply in what one says. It also shows up in how one lives. This is the cynic modality of parisia. Choosing poverty, carrying their beggars' pouches and walking sticks, freeing themselves from possessions and human attachment, cynic parisia is, as Foucault tells us, a, quote, mode of life. And I want to go through very quickly 3 different functions, because I'm conscious of the time. And this is probably sort of rehearsal at this point. For Foucault, this cynic mode of life has 3 functions. The first is what he calls the instrumental function. Cynics must not form attachments, right? They don't get married, except for Crates for very interesting reasons in Parkia, right? But most people don't get married. They tend to be poor. They don't have possessions in the same way, at least is what I'm figuring out. They live a life free of detachments. So that's the first function, this instrumental function, which serves as the condition for the possibility of the cynic life of parisia. Second function, a reductive or stripping function. I'm going to quote him here because this is crucial here. This second reductive function entails, quote, a general sort of stripping of existence and opinions in order to tell the truth. Keep that stripping in mind. And then there's a third function, a probative or testing one. You live your life as a test of the truth, bringing to light, quote, in their irreducible nakedness, those things which alone are indispensable to human life, or which constitute its most elementary, rudimentary essence. By stripping life to its barest parts, by revealing the indispensable truths of life in their irreducible nakedness, cynics enact, quote, the reduction of life itself, of life to itself, to what it is in truth, which is revealed by the very act of leading the cynic life. And so here I want to go back to that second function. Consider Foucault, or at least Graham Burchell, Foucault's translator's language here. Stripping and nakedness are not throwaway terms for Foucault. These terms of nudity and bareness and stripping are not throwaway terms. The 3 functions of the cynic's life are exemplified by acts of self-exposure, of public nudity. Consider, as Foucault does, quote, Diogenes' famous gesture of masturbating in public and saying, but why are you so scandalized, since masturbation satisfies a need, just as eating does? I eat in public, and so why should I not satisfy this need in public? Diogenes isn't alone here either. While he's out here, pleasuring himself in public, Crates is giving Hipparchia the worst kind of striptease. You all are familiar with this too. Exposing himself as a way of disclosing his poverty, Crates also brings us face to face with nude flesh, with a body rendered vulnerable to the external gaze of others. Crates and Diogenes therefore denude, disrobe, defrock, pick your verb. They do this to themselves as a mode of erediction, of truth-telling, of parisia. Nudity, nakedness, barrenness, or not barrenness, bareness. These are central to the cynic's mode of erediction, his mode of parisia. Maybe you know where I'm headed. If cynics enact public self-exposure as the scandalous exposure of the truth of life, then Sojourner Truth's 1858 breast-bearing incident is also an enactment of parrhesia, of truth-telling. Are you all following me on this? We're all on the same page, right? If cynics are out here exposing themselves as an act of truth, then what Sojourner does is also an act of parrhesia. She confirms the truth of her gender, and those scare quotes will come into play later through her self-exposure. She tells the truth by embodying it. If I had more time, I might try to describe her as a cynic. I might discuss her itinerant movement and her modest red poor style of dress. I might remark that her beggar's pouch is a sewing needle. But there's another dimension to the cynic parrhesia, the scandalous. Scandal isn't my word, by the way. Foucault or Burchell uses the phrase, quote, life as scandal of the truth, unquote, to describe the barrenness of life mirrored in the presentation of the bare body. Stripping life to its barest components by stripping themselves, cynics shock the conscience. They jolt people out of their assumptive reliance on unnecessary norms. Cynics scandalize others not merely to provoke, but to reveal. You want to be happy, cynics seem to ask? Leave all that superfluous shit by the wayside. The scandalous is also Sojourner Truth's territory. Like Diogenes' act of showing and telling, he didn't simply masturbate in public, he told them why he did it. Sojourner showed and told. Denuding herself, she also asked them quietly, would you like to suck? In word, in deed, in body, in speech, Sojourner trafficked in scandalous nudity as an act of erudition. Given all this, it is tempting to suggest that had Foucault known about her, he might have described Sojourner Truth as yet another, perhaps more powerful cynic. Scandalously denuding herself as an act of erudition and living a modest life of itinerant movement, Sojourner feels like a Foucauldian cynic, but she only feels this way. We need to resist this temptation to bring her into the cynic fold, because while Sojourner enacted, indeed lived a kind of parrhesia, she did not have her name changed to Sojourner Truth for nothing. Sojourner's parrhesia was a parrhesia of the flesh, of Black female flesh. And this fleshy distinction makes all the difference. I will try to go quickly here. In her influential essay, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, Black feminist theorist Horton Spillers makes a distinction between the body and the flesh, ultimately suggesting that, quote, before the body, there is the flesh, that zero degree of social conceptualization that does not escape concealment under the brush of discourse or the reflexes of iconography, unquote. Though Spillers names the flesh as a liberated subject position, and the meaning of these lines have been heavily debated by Black studies scholars, including myself, most of us agree that Spillers understands Black female flesh as the site of profound violence. If we think of the flesh as primary narrative, Spillers writes, then we mean its seared, divided, ripped apartness, riveted to the ship's hull, fallen, or escaped overboard, unquote. The fact remains, flesh, Black female flesh, shows itself in and through a violence characterized by a theft of the body, a severing of the body from its motive will, its active desire, unquote. In this regard, the Middle Passage actively worked to destroy anything resembling a Black subjectivity, a Black selfhood, and was largely successful in doing so. Even when we are making decisions, Black life necessarily indexes this transformation, this transformation from African subjectivities into accountable matter. We become the brutal material and economic substance that fueled and fuels the development of the modern West, and one need only attend to the crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or more precisely, to the profound silence of the West in response to that crisis. This is no shade to what's happening in Gaza, and the Congo is on fire right now, and we don't know. To understand how this dynamic still persists to this day. In this enduring absence from a subject position, the violence, disciplinary or otherwise, did not and could not have subjectivating effects. Flesh, Black female flesh, therefore shows itself through theft, a theft of what I might call the subjectivity of the subject. Or as Saidiya Hartman succinctly puts it, Black flesh, even if it might be understood as human flesh, is, quote, existence defined at its most elemental level, unquote, which means that when it comes to Black flesh, even, quote, the recognition of humanity holds out the promise of not liberating or redeeming one's suffering, but rather intensifying it, unquote. Flesh is therefore the site of a life already stripped, already reduced to its barest parts. It is already merely survival, even when it might appear otherwise. Yes, it appears that Sojourner Truth made a choice, but this choice was the only one she had. Black female flesh chooses what is already chosen for it. As you can imagine, this is not the case with Foucault's cynics. As Foucault puts it, the cynic life is marked by the choice of life as scandal of the truth. Though the cynic's life is marked by destitution, and this matters, and it is a manifestation of the truth of life, there's a difference between chosen destitution and ontological destitution. Sorry, Celine, I'm talking about ontology instead of technology. Sojourner's was the latter, an ontological destitution. Though she had been manumitted, she wasn't free. For if she was, listen to this, she wouldn't have had to confirm the truth of her gender. Do you all understand what I'm saying? How are you free if you have to prove your normativity? And she wouldn't have had to confirm the truth of her gender, let alone give an anti-slavery speech in the first place. Unlike the cynics, then, Sojourner did not reveal any truth through her scandalous actions. She didn't prove anything in that moment, Hayward's felicitous excitement notwithstanding. This is the case because, as many Black feminist theorists show us, the ontological violence of chattel slavery rendered Black female flesh beyond the binary analytics of gender. Like all other enslaved Black women, Sojourner was worked and beaten to the same extent of her male counterparts, while also being subjected to what Horton Spillers calls the interiorized violence of sexual harassment and assault. I've nursed white men more manly than you. In short, Sojourner knew she traversed the normative gender terrain between man and woman. She was, as Horton Spillers puts it famously, ungendered. I'll be brief here too. Sojourner did not, or try to be brief, Sojourner didn't traverse just the man-woman divide either. As Zakiya Jackson powerfully argues, she also traversed the species divide between human and non-human animals. Consider the fact that in response to Sojourner's enfleshed parrhesia of exposing herself, one of the Democrats quipped that her breast looked like, quote, a sow's teat, unquote. Traversing not quite woman and not quite human either, even as she existed as the fleshy material that sustained gendered and species distinctions, Sojourner Truth's hand was forced. Whereas Diogenes and Crates chose to leap ahead of humanity, there was to become humanity's scouts, as Foucault puts it, Sojourner was already outside of humanity. There was no leaping ahead. Unlike Foucault's cynics, whose parrhesia reveals the truth, Sojourner's scandalous enactment of enfleshed parrhesia was not a revelation, but a repetition of the violence Sojourner had endured, of the violence still happening around the country. She reveals nothing, she repeats what we already know. And in this regard, Sojourner was herself, but not herself. She was, as Saidiya Hartman might say, fungible. She stood in for all Black life. And we can talk about this discussion of Aren't I a Woman and the translation of that in the Q&A if you want to. Sojourner Truth's enfleshed parrhesia, therefore, or what I'm calling Sojourner's truth, is nothing other than a manifestation of a violence everyone knew, a violence to which she was always and already subjected. That's her truth, repeating what we already know. In his liberal ecstasy, as liberals are often wont to do, William Hayward misses this. He thinks Sojourner proved the good doctor wrong, right? He sees a win here, but there isn't one. The scandal of Sojourner's truth is that there was no scandal. Or put differently, the only scandalous thing about Sojourner's truth was that the dust-up changed nothing. For gender and humanity aren't solely lodged in the body. They emerge, at least in Black life, through violence, epistemic and ontological violence that makes distinctions between humans and animals and men and women. It looks like a sow's teat. Nothing changed. But that's actually my point. It is precisely in the lack of utility, the uselessness of this scandalous event, that we find a different kind of parrhesia, an enfleshed parrhesia, whose very diction, whose mode of life as the scandal of the truth is instructive for pointing us, and perhaps Foucault, in a different direction. Which is to say, and I'm nearing the end now, her enfleshed sojourner's truth, her enfleshed parrhesia points us in a direction whereby parrhesia might be mobilized for the construction of a Black ethics. I don't have time to fully explore this here, so here's what we're going to do. Let's return to those three functions. You remember the instrumental function of not having any attachments, the reductive function of stripping life down as a way of exposing the truth, and living one's life as a test of truth. You all remember this, don't you? Just a few minutes ago. So yeah, do you all remember these three functions? Great, great. We're going to go ahead and move quickly here. I want to suggest that instead of thinking of those three functions, I want to suggest that Sojourner's Truth offers three other functions that run alongside, a la Fred Moten or Nathan Chandler, or pick your Black studies scholar, that function alongside the cynic's instrumental functions. So the first one, instead of this instrumental function of relieving oneself of detachments, it is a dispossessive function. Instead of choosing detachment, you are already detached. What does that mean? She had to suckle white boys at the expense of her own children. Second, alongside the reductive function is the function of already being reduced. Having been stripped down to life's bare truths, there isn't any space for the agential enactment of stripping. She's already there. That's already where we are. We must keep in mind that Sojourner was caught in a discursive game that she couldn't win. Third, the probative function of living one's life as test of the truth. Enfleshed parrhesia doesn't have the luxury of testing the truth, for the truth is already coerced, compelled, inescapable. There's nothing to prove. For one's very existence itself is proof of the inescapable violence of anti-Blackness. This is going to sound weird, and I hate to make this detour. I am standing here as proof of the violence of anti-Blackness right now. And I don't mean this as shade to any person in this room. It is a violence for me to be up here right now. And I don't mean that as a nasty thing. That is the structure of the game. That's not me saying something terrible. I'm not judging any of you. But I am, by my very presence, by talking about someone I love, in the way that I'm talking about her, I am enacting a violence. But it is the only decision that I have. So I'm gonna move to my conclusion. Living a life of dispossession and not detachment, having a mode of existence so thoroughly stripped down to the point where there is nothing left to strip, and being made to live a life that proves truths we already know. Enfleshed parrhesia marks what I understand to be the starting point of and for a Black ethics. If there is a self here, it cannot shape itself. Never fully anyway, for violence will always mark its existence and truncate its possibilities. I've written multiple conclusions to this paper, which I suppose comes as no surprise. That's what we do, we edit. My point here, though, is that this paper can be concluded in a few ways. I could, for example, end on a Foucauldian note. I could tell you that I'm aware of a folder in Foucault archives at the BNF where Foucault asks, why are we obliged to tell the truth about ourselves? Drawing from Sojourner's Truth, I might turn to Foucault's Confessions of the Flesh and suggest, as I have elsewhere, that although Foucault's reading of Augustine attunes us to the flesh's subject-forming capacities and therefore demands that it confess, because it is sinful, some of us are not even afforded the luxury of sinfulness. I could finish this paper then by demonstrating that some flesh is even stripped of its concupiscence, its desire, that flesh might be marked as sinful, not because it desires, but because it is the pornotrope site of objectification or sexual objectification. And in this regard, Black flesh, Black female flesh, is subjected to a life of forced confession, which is simply another way of describing enfleshed parrhesia. Why are we obliged to tell the truth about ourselves, Foucault? Because some of us can't do anything else. Or I might conclude with George Floyd. I might show you how, especially given Federico's comment of a question yesterday about trans-historical cynicism, I was thinking about that a lot. Sojourner's truth isn't simply hers. I might show you how her truth traverses time and space, how George Floyd's claims of "I can't breathe" and "I'm dead" during the process of his dying. Thank you, Celine, for this. That long death takes time, is also an enfleshed parisia. A dispossessed, stripped down repetition of a truth we already know. I could conclude this piece by suggesting that although Sojourner didn't die immediately after that incident, she'd already been dead, which is to say she'd already been an object solely for others' enjoyment and use. I might end this conclusion by suggesting that though it is the centerpiece for constructive Black ethics, enfleshed parisia offers us no resources for hope. Sorry, Lynn, I'm not quite an Afro-pessimist, but I'm getting close. I could conclude in other ways too, but I won't. So I will leave you with this. Though enfleshed parisia, this scandalous Black ethics is bleak. Though it might not offer hope, and though it might be made to live a life of forced confession, Black life remains a life of the hold, not simply in it, but of it. Which is to say, it is a life of holding and being held. Sorry. I didn't expect to cry. In all of its terrifying and beautiful capacities. It is a mode of life that clears spaces for love and care, even as it knows these spaces will be eliminated. Black life, and therefore a Black ethics, may offer us little by way of hope and change, but it does set in sharp relief the beauty and necessity of love and care. As Christina Sharp says, I had to, not I wanted to, I had to take care. Or as Baby Suge's Holy, a Parisiist in her own right, says, love your flesh, love it hard. Thank you.